I'm peeling off these hideous orange stickers from your fence right now." "That's what my neighbor, Diana, shouted as she tore down 3 little markers from my lakeside property." She truly believed she was upholding neighborhood rules. What she didn't realize was that a county judge had legally authorized those exact stickers. Diana's obsession with my so-called ugly fence tags set off a neighborhood conflict that ruined her standing, drained her bank account with legal bills, and completely crushed her dreams of becoming HOA president. How could just 3 stickers bring down the biggest Karen in our community? And Drama-nest viewers, tell me where you're watching from, because this one's a ride. Let me paint the picture. I live in a pristine lakeside neighborhood where the biggest source of gossip is usually whether someone let their lawn grow half an inch too high. Every morning, I'd be on my back deck sipping my coffee, soaking in the sunrise casting golden reflections over the water, and feeling thankful for the peaceful life I'd worked hard to build. The houses are well kept, the neighbors are, for the most part, perfectly reasonable. It's the kind of place you'd imagine growing old in without a worry in the world. That morning began just like any other. At exactly 6 a.m., I stepped onto the deck with my usual mug, inhaling the crisp morning air. That's when I noticed Diana Patterson making her regular lap around the neighborhood. Now, Diana's always been intense. At first glance, she seemed fine as she'd smile, wave, comment on your flower beds, and chat about the weather. But as she walked past my property that morning, something shifted. She stopped in her tracks, stared at my fence like she'd just spotted a crime scene, and did this dramatic double take. I thought, what on earth is she staring at? Then she pulled out, no joke, a magnifying glass from her oversized purse. Not just any magnifying glass either, a real Sherlock Holmes-style one. She began inspecting the 3 small orange stickers I had placed on my fence like they were evidence in some top-secret investigation. I sat there, trying not to laugh as she snapped photos from a dozen different angles, crouching and shifting like she was preparing a case for court. Then out came the measuring tape. She was literally recording the distance of each sticker from the edges of the fence boards. I was fascinated. She pulled out a thick clipboard, started taking notes, and began muttering about community appearance and violations. Her lips were moving rapidly, checking items off an invisible list, growing more agitated with every second. At this point, I was wondering if I was being pranked or if my neighbor had genuinely lost her mind over 3 tiny adhesive stickers. Across the street, I spotted Harold and Betty Stevens watching the whole scene unfold through their kitchen window. Harold looked like a man who'd seen this before. Betty had already settled in with her coffee, clearly ready for entertainment. I could see Harold mouth the words, "Here we go again." They've lived here longer than anyone, so if Harold was predicting trouble, it meant Diana's history of stirring chaos probably went deeper than I knew. Diana then marched up to my door with the self-importance of someone delivering a legal summons. I opened it before she could knock. There she stood, hugging her clipboard like it was a badge. "Good morning, Alex," she said, overly formal. "I need to speak with you regarding the decorative elements on your fence." I stared at her, confused. "Decorative elements?" I asked, trying to understand what she was talking about. She gestured toward the lakefront. "Those orange patches. I believe they don't meet the community's visual standards." Now, I've been living here for 5 years, and outside of the usual HOA rules about mowing your lawn and keeping your fence clean, no one's ever talked about aesthetic standards. And those little stickers? They were harmless, functional, and clearly something she didn't understand. Trying to stay calm, I told her, "Diana, those aren't just decorations. You really shouldn't take them down." But she waved off my concern like I was warning her about peeling off a label from a toaster. "Don't worry about it, Alex," she said, completely confident. "I'll be careful when I remove them." Before I could stop her, she was already halfway to my fence, moving like she was on a mission to save the neighborhood from some sort of crisis. I stood frozen in disbelief as she delicately peeled off the first sticker, held it up like it was a prize, and inspected it with her magnifying glass. The look of smug satisfaction on her face was unbelievable, like she'd just solved a neighborhood emergency. I could feel a grin spreading on my face, not because I was amused, but because I knew something she didn't. From across the lawn, Harold called out, "Diana, dear, Maybe double check what those stickers are before pulling them off. But she waved him off. Thanks, Harold, but I've done my homework. Betty even came outside, genuinely trying to stop her. Diana, are you sure you understand what those markers are for? Still, Diana was already on to the second sticker, convinced of her authority. Betty, I've been studying neighborhood design for years. I know what's acceptable and what's not. Harold looked at me with a knowing glance. Alex, we tried. Some people just don't want to listen. I nodded back, because at this point, there was no reasoning with someone that determined to ignore advice, and with that, I watched Diana Patterson confidently peel off the last of the 3 stickers, completely unaware of the storm she just triggered, carefully placing the peeled stickers into a little Ziploc bag like they were evidence from a high-profile crime scene. I couldn't help but reflect on what she just triggered. There was something almost tragic about watching someone so eagerly dig their own hole, completely unaware of the consequences rushing toward them. The look of triumph on Diana Patterson's face as she sealed that bag told me all I needed to know, as she really believed she had done something heroic for the community. In her mind, she wasn't just enforcing rules, as she was upholding tradition and protecting the neighborhood's pride. But what I said to her next, that would haunt Diana for weeks. She had no idea what she was stepping into. Tell me in the comments, have you ever seen someone march confidently into such a massive blunder? Because what happened next was where things truly took a turn. I went back inside, still stunned, and not 20 minutes later, I could hear her outside, practically shouting into her phone in the front yard like she wanted the entire block to hear. Bob, I just took real leadership action over at the Rivera place, she declared proudly. Sometimes you have to step up and defend the integrity of the community. I stood by the window listening, shaking my head. Lady, you really don't know what you've done. What Diana didn't yet understand, and what became glaringly obvious in the following days, was that she had some pretty serious political aspirations. Our little sticker drama, that was just her opening move. Apparently, she'd been waiting for the perfect moment to prove her leadership chops, and somehow, my fence became the stage for her grand debut. Over the next hour, I watched as she made at least 3 more calls, each one more passionate than the last, telling neighbors how she had uncovered and swiftly addressed a so-called major visual violation that could have compromised property values. What fascinated me was watching her morph from someone slightly bothered by a few orange markers to a self-declared neighborhood aesthetic crusader. By noon, she was back at my fence, but now armed with materials for what appeared to be a full-on political campaign. She had clipboards with community surveys, printed HOA registration forms, even typed out policy drafts centered entirely around this sticker incident. She took measurements again, logged fence details, and appeared to be compiling a full case file, as if my fence had committed a federal offense. But what really made me pause was the glossy flyer poking out of her tote bag. It featured a photo of her with the headline, "Diana Patterson, Aesthetic Excellence for All." Beneath that, bullet points detailed her vision for community elevation. I realized then she had been planning a run for HOA president all along, and she'd chosen my fence as the battleground for her political launch. As I watched, she rehearsed a speech right there on my lawn, passionately gesturing toward my fence like it was evidence in a major city scandal. When I stepped outside again, she was mid-removal of the second sticker. I gave her one final warning. "Diana," I said, keeping my voice measured, "I really think you should stop this right now." But instead of reconsidering, she launched into what sounded like a resume pitch. "Alex, I hold a bachelor's in art history from State University," she declared proudly, as if that somehow gave her the right to dictate neighborhood design. "I know what constitutes a visual disturbance." I tried to show her a document as something I knew could stop this entire mess, but she barely glanced at it before waving it off, and then she made the mistake that changed everything. Caught up in her moment of self-righteousness, she said it out loud, "When I'm HOA president, this kind of visual pollution will be wiped out. These awful stickers are ruining my lakefront campaign photos." I froze. Did she just admit that the real reason for this entire drama was her photo ops? This wasn't about neighborhood standards. This was about her personal branding. She was literally removing property markers, illegally placed markers, because they clashed with her campaign pictures. I pulled out my phone and hit record, This moment deserved evidence. As soon as she noticed the camera, she instantly switched into full politician mode. Perfect posture, rehearsed smile, like she was at a podium. "For the record," she began, voice ringing with theatrical pride, "I'm Diana Patterson, future HOA president, and these aesthetic violations end today." She held up that plastic bag of stickers like she just solved a high-level corruption case. The dramatics were so intense, I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing. By now, a small crowd had gathered. Harold and Betty Stevens had come out of their house, visibly concerned. And from down the street came Margaret White, the current HOA president, drawn by what was clearly becoming a full-blown neighborhood incident. The whole scene had escalated into what could only be described as a full-blown neighborhood spectacle. Bob Wilson, who lived 2 doors down, wandered over to see what the fuss was all about. Diana, clearly thriving on the attention, acted like she was addressing a crowd at her campaign launch party. Bob, ever the enthusiastic supporter of order, started clapping and cheering her on. "Finally, someone's taking a stand for community values," he shouted, completely buying into Diana's self-made narrative that she was saving the neighborhood. Margaret White, the current HOA president, arrived not long after, drawn by the crowd and confusion. She surveyed the situation with growing concern. "Diana," she said cautiously, "maybe we should handle this through the proper HOA procedures before involving half the neighborhood." But Diana wasn't hearing it. Drunk on the attention and convinced she was riding a wave of public approval, she turned Margaret's concern into a campaign moment. "Margaret, this is exactly why we need fresh leadership," she said, turning toward the crowd. "I'm not afraid to make the hard decisions when others hesitate." Watching this circus unfold, I could see Harold and Betty Stevens across the street, clearly worried. Their expression said it all. They'd seen this kind of train wreck before. Harold gave it one last try. "Diana, maybe double-check what those markers actually mean before going any further." But she wasn't interested in wisdom. "Harold, Betty, I do appreciate your concern," she replied in the most patronizing tone imaginable, "but I've already taken decisive action. I've contacted the proper authorities. I know exactly what I'm dealing with." That line hit me like a jolt. Authorities? Over stickers? That's when it clicked. Diana had just kicked off a chain reaction she had no control over, and still, she beamed with satisfaction, proudly holding up her little evidence bag like she'd just saved the world. Bob Wilson applauded. Margaret looked unsure but didn't intervene. Diana, of course, was basking in the moment, believing this act of leadership had secured her path to HOA presidency. What she didn't realize was that she'd just handed me all the ammunition I'd need to bring her down. She thought she'd won. She thought the stickers were her political breakthrough. But what she didn't know was going to turn this into her worst nightmare. What do you think those stickers really were? Drop your wildest theories in the comments. Anna Dramanest always loves hearing them. And let me tell you, there's nothing quite like watching a neighbor slowly realize they've made a colossal mistake. Harold put it best the next morning when I saw him chatting with Betty on their porch. "That Patterson woman," he said, shaking his head, "is about to learn a painful lesson about starting fights she doesn't understand." Betty asked if they should warn her again, but Harold just sighed. "She ignored us twice already. Some lessons you can't teach. You just have to let them play out." They both settled into their chairs with coffee and the paper like they were getting ready for the best show of the week. And then the phone calls started. At exactly 8 a.m. on day 1, my phone rang. On the other end was a man from code enforcement, sounding more confused than concerned. Sir, we got a report about a broken bar decorative stickers on your property," he said. The complaint described them as safety hazards to the community. "But we're not really sure how that applies." I asked who filed the complaint, and of course it was Diana Patterson. She had identified herself as a member of the HOA board and claimed to be conducting an official investigation into neighborhood violations. 2 hours later, another call came in, this time from the county planning office. "Mr. Rivera, we received several photographs of what seem to be attachments on your lakefront fence. The complainant is requesting an official inspection for possible permit violations." And that's when I understood Diana's strategy. She was calling every county office she could think of, trying to manufacture an official case against my 3 harmless little stickers. You almost had to admire her commitment. If only it weren't so tragically misguided. Day 2 brought the most ridiculous call yet, this time from Environmental Services. "Sir, we've received a report about potential toxic orange contamination affecting local wildlife at your address," the woman told me, reading directly from a report. They were preparing to send a hazmat team until they realized the complaint was about stickers. I confirmed that yes, we were talking about regular adhesive paper stickers, and there was a long, awkward pause before she responded, "Oh, thank goodness. We thought we had a chemical spill." I laughed and gently suggested that maybe the caller was just a little too passionate about the aesthetics of fence D8 copyright core. She agreed, admitting it was unusual to get environmental hazard complaints about sticker colors. But here's where the real show began. One by one, the same departments Diana had called started returning her calls, and I could see her pacing back and forth in her front yard, growing more frantic with each one. From my kitchen window, I watched her gesturing wildly into her phone, clearly not hearing what she wanted from her supposed allies. Harold and Betty were watching, too. Betty leaned toward Harold and said, "She's getting more flustered with every call." And Harold, ever the wise neighbor, just nodded. Harold simply nodded with that knowing expression of his and said, "Just wait until the county gets back to her." And right on cue, the turning point hit on day 3. That morning, my phone rang again, only this time, the voice on the other end was much more serious than before. "Mr. Rivera," the caller said, "we need to inform you that removing court-issued property stickers is a violation of county code." "Has anyone attempted to remove them from your fence?" I told him yes. Someone had removed the AMA, and not only that, I had it all on video. There was a long pause. Then, in a much firmer tone, he asked me to send over the footage immediately. "You're in luck," I said. "I've got exactly what you need." Meanwhile, across the street, Diana was knee-deep in her own series of callbacks, and they were sounding more urgent by the minute. Bob Wilson, concerned by her increasingly loud and frantic phone conversations, wandered over to her house. When he came back, he looked stunned. "She says people are accusing her of calling the FBI over stickers," he told his wife. "But she insists she was just being thorough." Poor Bob still had no idea how deep Diana had dug herself, but he was beginning to realize that her thoroughness might have crossed some serious lines. Then came the final, brutal phone call, the one that really seemed to shake her. I could see her through the kitchen window, listening intently while scribbling down frantic notes. From the bits I caught, someone was explaining to her slowly that filing false environmental reports is a crime, and no, orange paper stickers are not considered toxic hazards to local wildlife. The confidence she'd flaunted during her grand sticker crusade, completely gone. Now, she looked like someone desperately trying to figure out how her passionate complaints about neighborhood integrity had snowballed into legal consequences. What struck me most was how hard she kept clinging to her political ambitions, even as everything unraveled around her. When Margaret White, the current HOA president, stopped by to check in, Diana tried to salvage her campaign. "Margaret," she said defensively, "a future president must be thorough in all investigations." I followed protocol, but her voice didn't have the same commanding tone anymore. It cracked with uncertainty. Margaret's skeptical expression said it all. After hearing about all the departments now circling back, even she was starting to realize this had gone too far. Watching from my deck, I could see Harold quietly shake his head. "We did everything we could," he told Betty. "Some people have to learn the hard way." Then he folded his newspaper and leaned back like he was settling in to watch the rest unfold. By the end of day 3, Diana looked completely overwhelmed. From my vantage point, I could see her standing in her kitchen, staring at the plastic bag containing the stickers. It no longer looked like a trophy. It looked like evidence of a very costly mistake. Harold nailed it when he muttered, "She picked a fight she didn't understand, a broken bar, and now she's about to learn why some battles aren't worth starting." The irony was almost poetic. Diana had worked so hard to prove she was leadership material, only to systematically expose every reason she shouldn't be in charge. Every call she made, every complaint she submitted, every attempt to escalate the situation only dug her deeper. 3 different government departments had now confirmed she'd made a serious error. But would she back down, or would her pride keep driving her straight into more trouble? Let me know in the comments. So what would you do if you realized you'd accidentally involved the FBA broken bar over stickers? Fast forward 2 weeks, and the entire neighborhood was buzzing with anticipation for the upcoming home meeting. Word had spread like wildfire, and everyone was eager to see how this sticker saga would wrap up. Harold and Betty got there early, settling into their favorite seats like it was opening night at the movies. Betty even brought popcorn. "Wouldn't miss this for anything," she whispered to Harold, both of them watching Diana prep what looked like a full-blown professional presentation at the front of the room. For those unfamiliar with how these things usually go, here's a quick rundown. Home meetings, a short for homeowners association, are typically dry affairs. We vote on stuff like what shade of beige your fence can be, how long your grass is allowed to grow, and whether wind chimes are too loud. But tonight was different. There was an electricity in the air. Everyone could feel it. Diana Patterson was about to make her biggest move yet. She walked in like she was running for public office, her arms full of glossy campaign brochures, voter surveys, and policy drafts. Her energy dominated the entire room. Unrolling a large banner that read, "Aesthetic Excellence A. Diana Patterson for President," she held it up like she was launching a national campaign. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, addressing our modest crowd like she was speaking at a citywide town hall, "today, we don't just resolve the sticker situation, though we define the standards of my future presidency." Yes, you read that right. Diana had officially transformed a minor fence dispute into the foundation of her political platform, and her presentation? Oh, it was just getting started. Diana stood confidently next to a large easel, flipping through a set of glossy, professionally designed slides like she was delivering a strategic briefing to the United Nations. Her first slide, a dramatic photo of my former sticker zoomed in, circled in red marker, and labeled visual offenses. Slide 2 featured her so-called analysis of declining property values, complete with impressive-looking charts and graphs. Of course, none of the numbers were based on anything real. They were completely fabricated. Then came slide 3, Diana Patterson's presidential vision: a zero tolerance for visual pollution. Bullet points included promises to elevate aesthetics and eliminate decorative chaos. Margaret White, our current and very competent HOA president, raised a valid concern right away. "Diana," she said carefully, "those markings in the photos, a broken bar, they look like official notices. Are you sure they weren't legally placed?" But Diana, too swept up in her campaign mode to hear logic, turned even this into a campaign soundbite. "With all due respect, Margaret," she replied with a polished gesture toward her slides, "this is exactly the kind of complacency we need to move beyond. I'm prepared to make the tough calls when others won't." The mood in the room started to shift. To Diana's momentum was building. Her presentation skills, to be fair, were strong. Bob Wilson, her ever-loyal supporter, stood and addressed the room. "Folks, Diana's done her homework," he said enthusiastically. "She's reached out to every relevant agency to ensure everything was handled properly." Another board member chimed in, noting that if there were legal issues with Diana's actions, surely the county would have notified them by now. Harold and Betty Stevens shared a one of quiet frustration. They knew the truth but had long since learned that reason didn't stand a chance against Diana's steamrolling agenda. Diana gave them a tight smile. "Harold, Betty, your service to this community has been appreciated," she said in that patronizing tone she had perfected. "But sometimes, leadership means moving forward, not clinging to outdated thinking." The implication didn't sit well with several neighbors, but her supporters were too dazzled by the presentation to notice the rift forming. Then came the vote. Exactly what Diana had hoped for. 4 board members voted to approve Diana's enforcement action. 2 expressed concern about how it had been handled, but the motion passed. The result: I was served with an official notice to correct aesthetic violations within 2 weeks or face a $25 daily fine starting on day 15. Diana was glowing. "This," she declared proudly, "is what real leadership looks like. This is the kind of initiative you can expect under my presidency." When it was my turn to speak, I stood up slowly and addressed the board with a calm, measured voice. "I fully respect the board's decision," I said, locking eyes with Diana. "And I'll see you all in court." The room went silent. That wasn't the response anyone was expecting, especially not Diana. Her victorious grin faltered just slightly. Margaret looked completely thrown off. "After all, who sues over a $25 fine?" From across the room, Bob whispered to his wife, "Is a broken bar court really necessary over fence stickers?" But Harold and Betty? They didn't look surprised. They just exchanged a knowing glance, and Harold leaned back in his chair like he was settling in for the best part of the story. "Here we go," he probably thought. "Alex is about to drop the hammer." The meeting wrapped up with Diana floating on her perceived success, shaking hands, chatting with supporters, and talking policy proposals with Bob like she was already sworn into office. The plastic bag with my confiscated stickers still sat next to her display materials, her proud little symbol of victory. As the crowd began to file out of the community center, Betty approached me with quiet concern. "Alex, we should have pushed back harder," she said, clearly feeling guilty about letting things go this far. But I smiled and reassured her, "Don't worry, Diana's about to learn a lesson you just can't teach with warnings." Harold nodded in agreement beside her. "Some folks have to run headfirst into the wall before they realize it's solid." And Diana? She was riding high, a fine authorized campaign underway, and her path to the HOA presidency looking clearer than ever. But what she didn't realize, a broken bar, was that I had been waiting for this exact moment. And now, the tables were about to turn in a way she never saw coming. What was my plan? Let's just say Diana's victory lap was about to end a broken bar in court. The 2 weeks that followed Diana's so-called victory were nothing short of astonishing. She was riding high, practically floating through the neighborhood, calling the local paper to boast about her big aesthetic enforcement success, dropping quotes about community values and the sacred duty of maintaining visual standards. Bob Wilson made it his personal mission to visit her daily, praising what he called her exceptional presidential leadership. To anyone who'd listen, he declared that Diana was the HOA president this community desperately needed. Diana soaked it all up like it was a campaign rally. These weren't just casual chats, they were strategy sessions. She outlined her grand vision for a better, brighter neighborhood under her reign, as if she were planning a citywide renovation. Week 1 rolled by with what Diana dubbed compliance monitoring. In practice, that meant she walked past my property twice a day, clipboard in hand, snapping photos, measuring fence distances, and building what she considered an airtight case against me for willfully defying HOA orders. I watched the whole thing from my kitchen window, sipping coffee, completely amused by her relentless effort in a battle she didn't even realize she'd already lost. Then came week 2 and Diana stepped things up again. She started holding meetings with a lawyer, claiming that my refusal to remove the, already removed, stickers called for legal escalation. I can only imagine the look on that poor attorney's face when she dumped her documentation in front of him. Hundreds of photos, handwritten notes, and charts about aesthetic threats. The guy probably thought he was walking into a typical HOA dispute. Instead, he was signing on to one of the most absurd cases his firm had ever touched. But Diana had him convinced she was the hero of the story, defending the community against chaos and disobedience. Then came the big day 14. The deadline had passed. I hadn't lifted a finger to comply, and Diana was positively gleaming with anticipation. Now, she could flex her presidential muscle by filing a lawsuit. This, she claimed, was her first major act of HOA leadership, a defining moment, a precedent setter. She proudly told her neighbors that this would send a clear message: under her administration, no violation would go unpunished, no matter how small or insignificant it might seem. The lawsuit itself was a masterpiece of overconfidence and misunderstanding. She filed for $800 in accumulated fines, additional penalties for willful non-compliance, and even requested punitive damages to deter future violations. You'd think she was prosecuting corporate fraud, not squabbling over 3 small fence stickers. A local paper even picked up the story, labeling it an unusual but increasingly dramatic HOA enforcement case that had caught the eye of some legal professionals. That's when I decided it was time to call in the expert. Enter Emma Walsh. Emma's been my lawyer for years and she's seen it all. I gave her a full rundown, from the sticker removal to the formal complaint to Diana's glossy 3-slide HOA presentation. When I finished, There was this long pause on the line, and then Emma burst out laughing. Not a polite chuckle, full on, can't breathe, laugh out loud amusement. "Alex," she finally managed, "Diana Patterson just stepped on the biggest legal landmine in the entire county. This is going to be fun." Diana scheduled a meeting with an attorney. To her, this was a legal milestone, a demonstration of her resolve and professionalism. She handed him binders stuffed with printouts, photos, and hand-drawn diagrams, presenting it like a case of major civic misconduct. The poor guy had no idea what he was in for. He probably thought he was helping HOA enforce its rule and not stepping into one of the pettiest legal debacles in town history. Then came the big day 14. The deadline passed. I hadn't complied. Diana was thrilled. She filed the lawsuit like she was signing a historic proclamation. $800 in accrued fines, charges of willful non-compliance, and even a demand for punitive damages. She genuinely thought this was her moment, that her courtroom crackdown would be the crown jewel of her presidency. The local paper picked it up and ran a quirky piece on it, describing the case as an unusually intense HOA dispute drawing interest from legal professionals. That was my cue. Enter Emma Walsh. Emma's been my lawyer for years and nothing phases her. When I explained the situation, from Diana's sticker-snatching campaign to her courtroom ambitions, Emma didn't just laugh as she wheezed. "Alex," she said, finally catching her breath, "this woman just stepped on the biggest legal rake in the entire county. This is going to be glorious." Emma got to work, and what she uncovered was a broken bar devastating. First, the timeline. Diana's business license for lakefront property staging had been filed exactly 2 weeks before her first sticker complaint. She wasn't protecting the community, she was clearing the background for her promotional photos. Emma dug into home minutes and found something even juicier. Diana had recently proposed a budget increase for aesthetic consulting, a position she'd clearly intended to fill herself. She wasn't just self-promoting, she was trying to get the neighborhood to pay her for enforcing standards that boosted her business. The Stevens, ever reliable, filled in the missing pieces. Betty shared how Diana had been out every morning with her camera, grumbling about unsightly fences and visual clutter disrupting her client sessions. Harold confirmed that Diana had approached multiple homeowners with offers to improve their curb appeal for marketing photos. Together, they painted a damning picture of a woman using HOA authority as a stepping stone for personal profit. And then came the kicker. Emma found an interview Diana had given to a neighborhood blog. In it, she described herself as a future HOA president and certified aesthetic consultant, saying, "Community rules aren't suggestions, they're obligations to be enforced by people who understand excellence." That one quote told the whole story. Diana had cast herself as judge, jury, and personal brand manager. Emma's legal strategy was simple but brilliant. She would show the court that Diana had abused her HOA authority, weaponized community rules to eliminate visual obstacles, and masked personal gain behind a phony Section 8 of civic duty. And Emma wasn't done. She found something in the county records, something about those stickers. She wouldn't tell me exactly what it was, but the glint in her eye as she closed the file said it all. Diana Patterson was about to walk straight into a legal buzzsaw. Court day arrived, and Diana showed up looking like she was about to argue before the Supreme Court. Of folders, binders, evidence charts, and that unmistakable glow of someone too confident for their own good. Harold and Betty sat in the gallery, quietly settling in like they were attending opening night at the theater. Harold leaned over and whispered to Betty, "We tried to warn her. Now we get to watch justice do the talking." Diana was flanked by her ever-loyal Bob Wilson and 2 others who genuinely believed they were part of a noble cause. As they waited for the judge, I overheard Diana whisper to Bob, "This win will make me the go-to expert for property staging in the entire county." The irony was almost too much. When Diana took the stand, she delivered her opening remarks like a TED Talk. "Your Honor," she began, all poise and posture. "As a property enhancement specialist with years of aesthetic consulting experience, I can confirm that these orange stickers were a direct threat to the visual integrity of our lakefront community." She presented her carefully curated photos of before and after images, diagrams, client portfolios, everything laid out like an ad campaign. She circled the offensive stickers in red and claimed they ruined the picturesque vibe of the neighborhood. And to be honest, Her presentation was slick, you could tell she'd rehearsed it, but underneath the polish was a confession that she had used her power to eliminate anything that disrupted her business aesthetic. What Diana didn't know or what was waiting just around the corner was the truth about those stickers, the real reason they were on my fence. And when that truth came out, everything Diana had built to her credibility, her campaign, her so-called presidency was about to crumble in front of everyone. Ready for the twist? Let me know when to continue. Things are about to implode. Diana believed she was just a few minutes away from courtroom glory. Judge Rodriguez, listening carefully to her polished presentation, occasionally nodded as she spoke about her qualifications and dedication to community standards. When she finished, he remarked that her documentation was surprisingly thorough for a neighborhood dispute. Diana took that as validation, beaming proudly as she returned to her seat, utterly convinced she had just sealed her reputation as the HOA savior of suburban order. And then Emma Walsh stood. The moment she rose, I saw the glint in her eye that said Diana was about to experience a complete legal unmaking. Your Honor, Emma began, voice calm, composed, and deadly, I'd like to present evidence revealing the true motivation behind this enforcement action. The screen lit up with Diana's own business flyer ads for lakefront staging services and aesthetic consulting with her name, title, and contact info in bold print. Emma laid out the timeline with surgical precision. Diana's complaints began immediately after filing her home business license. It wasn't about stickers, it was about scenery. Then came the real damage. Emma called Harold and Betty Stevens to testify. Harold explained how Diana had dismissed their warnings, and Betty described watching her solicit clients around the neighborhood, boasting about her ability to enhance curb appeal for photo shoots. Their statements confirmed a pattern. Diana was using HOA authority to clean up the landscape not for the neighborhood, but for her portfolio. Then Emma went deeper. She projected screenshots of Diana's social media posts, full of quotes about visual excellence and promises to deliver marketing-ready lakefront views. She shared candid neighbor testimonials, promotional language, and dated flyers, all linking Diana's personal business goals directly to her HOA enforcement actions. The courtroom shifted, the temperature dropped. Judge Rodriguez leaned forward. Ms. Patterson, have you been using your position on the HOA board to eliminate elements that interfere with your business operations? Diana, clearly shaken but trying to hold ground, replied, Your Honor, I believe my success as a consultant only reinforces my qualifications to uphold neighborhood standards. I'm protecting our community while also providing services neighbors value. It landed with a thud. Even she could hear how weak it sounded. That's when the judge requested the original documentation on my stickers, the thing Diana had confidently dismissed as unapproved graffiti. The moment those words left his mouth, I saw her shoulders stiffen. I'd like to examine the historical records on those markings, Judge Rodriguez said, pulling up files on his screen. Diana tried to stay composed. Those records will only confirm that such markings were never approved under any official HOA regulation, she said, voice a little too tight. But it wasn't up to her anymore. The Stevens got their vindication when the judge asked about their earlier efforts to de-escalate. Betty calmly explained how she had warned Diana to verify the nature of the stickers before removing them. Harold followed up, recounting how Diana had brushed them off as relics of old thinking. Their testimony painted the picture of a woman so obsessed with political clout and personal profit that she bulldozed right over anyone offering common sense. As Judge Rodriguez pored over the files, Diana's self-assurance began to unravel. Her expression shifted to calculation, giving way to confusion. Bob Wilson, once her loudest supporter, leaned forward in his seat, brows furrowed, clearly beginning to understand the mess they were in. Emma continued dismantling Diana's credibility with methodical grace, each point building toward a damning truth. Diana Patterson had been using her position not to serve her community but to serve herself. The judge's questions became sharper. Why were your business materials circulated before the HOA even took up this matter formally? How do you reconcile your commercial interests with your enforcement actions? Diana's responses grew more defensive. She clung to her narrative of community excellence, but it was falling apart fast. Then came the moment at a pivot point. Judge Rodriguez froze mid-scroll, staring at something on his monitor. His eyes narrowed, He tapped the screen. "Interesting," he murmured. Diana tried to maintain her poise, but the judge's sudden shift in focus sent a ripple through the room. Something had changed. He had found something she hadn't accounted for. The courtroom fell into an eerie stillness as everyone sensed it. The truth Diana had so carefully avoided was about to surface. And what Judge Rodriguez was about to reveal would turn this already embarrassing case into a full-blown catastrophe. What had the judge found that would unravel Diana's entire narrative? Judge Rodriguez looked up from his monitor, a flicker of both amusement and disappointment playing across his face. The courtroom fell silent as he spoke. "Ms. Patterson," he said, with a pause heavy enough to make everyone shift in their seats, "I've come across a document that I believe will be of particular interest to you." He tapped a few keys, and the courtroom screen flickered to life. There it was, an official HOA approval form with Diana Patterson's signature right at the bottom, dated 3 years ago. Bold header at the top, "Emergency approval for county boundary markers a lakefront area," and underneath that, "Signed by Diana Patterson, Design Committee Chair." The color drained from Diana's face. Judge Rodriguez read aloud from the document. "Emergency approval granted for placement of county boundary markers along lakefront properties, as requested by the county surveyor's office, for ongoing property dispute resolution." The date stamp was unmistakable. This wasn't someone else's decision. Diana had personally signed off on the very same orange stickers she'd later declared a visual blight. "They were just for boundary markers," she mumbled, voice barely audible. "Note a broken bar, not those ugly orange things, a broken bar." But the judge wasn't interested in her attempted spin. "Ms. Patterson," he said with controlled firmness, "boundary markers and legal survey notices are the same. The stickers you removed are the exact markers you authorized for permanent placement. You didn't just recognize them, you approved them." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Diana stared at the screen like she was looking at a ghost. The reality hit her in slow, painful waves. Everything her lawsuit, her political platform, her crusade for visual purity was built on the removal of something she herself had ordered installed. "Yeah, broken bar, I caused this?" she asked, sounding for the first time like a real person instead of a wannabe official. Judge Rodriguez nodded. "Yes, Miss Patterson, this situation is entirely of your own making." The silence that followed was broken by Bob Wilson standing up abruptly. The man who had been Diana's loudest supporter was done. "Your Honor," he said clearly, "I withdraw all support for Miss Patterson. She misled this community for personal gain, and apparently, even lied about her own actions." Other neighbors began whispering, their shock palpable. The truth had shattered the illusion. Diana hadn't been fighting for the community. She'd been fighting for her buzziness and against her own decisions. Harold and Betty Stevens exchanged glances. Finally validated, the judge turned to them. "You both attempted to prevent this from escalating. You advised Miss Patterson to verify the nature of those markers before taking any action." They nodded solemnly, and the judge offered a brief, respectful acknowledgement of their wisdom. Then came the final ruling. "Ms. Patterson," Judge Rodriguez began, voice firm and clear, "you authorized the boundary markers 3 years ago. You then targeted the property owner for non-compliance with your own directive, used your HOA authority for private business interests, and ignored the reasoned counsel of your fellow community members." His verdict was swift and unrelenting. Reimbursement of all legal fees incurred by the defendant. Formal written apology letters to every government agency she contacted with false reports. 60 hours of mandatory community service, wearing an orange safety vest in the same color that sparked this entire debacle. Immediate resignation from all HOA positions. It was brutal. It was poetic, and it was entirely deserved. Diana would now spend 2 months picking up trash and cleaning sidewalks in the color she once claimed was an aesthetic threat, forced to serve her community in the most literal, humbling way possible. And her resignation? That permanently crushed her dream of HOA presidency. Fitting, really. After all, Diana hadn't proven herself a leader. She'd proven she was exactly the kind of person leadership should protect a neighborhood from. A judgment like that doesn't just disqualify someone from community leadership, it rewrites their legacy. Diana's exit from the courtroom wasn't just a walk of shame, it was a full-blown collapse. Her once impressive business portfolio lay in disarray, campaign flyers crumpled and forgotten, and in her hand, she still clutched that infamous plastic bag containing the orange stickers as if it were both a relic and a reminder of the worst decision she ever made. Bob Wilson didn't miss a beat. "I can't believe I ever supported her," he told a small crowd of neighbors outside. "She lied to all of USA about her goals, her motives, and even her own history." But the story didn't end at the courthouse doors. Diana's court-mandated community service turned into a neighborhood spectacle. Local news headlines read, "Former HOA candidate learns orange isn't so bad." Her fluorescent Vesta, the same color she once declared an eyesore, became an ironic badge as she scrubbed benches, picked up trash, and fixed real problems for the first time. The same residents she once tried to control now waved and smiled as she quietly went about her duties, a humbled figure in high-visibility gear. Her business gone. Clients dropped her almost overnight. No one wanted to be associated with lawsuits, local scandal, and a woman whose version of aesthetic consulting now looked more like political sabotage. Within 2 weeks, a for sale sign appeared in her yard. Diana was moving on, not hopefully to a place where she'd choose her battles with more care, and maybe listen to the people who'd tried to help her avoid this mess. Ironically, her departure left the neighborhood better than it had ever been. In the aftermath, the HOA introduced new procedure. Every complaint would now require independent verification before enforcement. In short, they institutionalized the common sense Diana had ignored. Harold and Betty Stevens became the unofficial community heroes. Their quiet wisdom and measured voices, dismissed by Diana as outdated, were now revered. Margaret White continued her role as HOA president, more appreciated than ever, and determined to lead with facts, not ego. 6 months later, when new homeowners moved into Diana's former house, they greeted Harold and Betty with this, "We believe in checking the facts before making a fuss." Harold smiled. "Welcome to the neighborhood." And as for the 3 little orange stickers, they still sit on my fence, untouched, protected, and legendary, not just as legal boundary markers, but as symbols of everything our neighborhood learned. They remind us what real leadership looks like, and how dangerous it can be when someone confuses personal ambition with public service. Harold said it best, "The best neighborhood drama isn't about yelling or revenge. It's about lessons hard-earned, deeply felt, and remembered by everyone who watched them unfold." Diana Patterson didn't just lose a court case. She became a cautionary tale about ignoring good advice, about confusing ego with responsibility, and about what happens when you try to lead without listening. And all because of 3 little orange stickers. If this story inspired you to stand up to your own HOA Karen, smash that like button. Drop your wildest neighborhood drama in the comments. I promise, they're everywhere, and we need to spot the signs early. Thanks for watching. Catch you in the next Anna Drama Nest episode, where justice is always around the corner, the camera never blinks, and there's always another plot twist waiting just one clip away. Stay legal, stay smart, and as always, a broken bar, keep those cameras rolling. The end. Or is it?